You might have noticed, but recently, both online and on social media, the Green Party are doing really well. In fact, we've just polled above the Labour government, and since I became leader, we've over doubled our membership and size. So we're really, really surging. We also know there's nothing more important, though, than being in the community. And so what we're doing tonight is bringing Bristolians all together to talk practically what does it look like to take on this failing Labour government and take the fight to reform. People are really excited. I think it's as simple as that actually people are feeling hope for the first time, or maybe for a long time. They're seeing the Labour government that promised change, but actually are just implementing austerity once again. And then we have the Reform Party, who are rejecting the old two-party system, but offering hate and division. And actually, I think what people recognise is if reform can surge through the polls with hate and division, there's no reason why the Green Party can't and are surging through the polls with a politics of hope and community and tangible politics to make a difference. And I think that's the key bit. This isn't about slogans or just kind of mouthing off. This is about going, we have practical solutions in your community that you're already seeing through the election of Carla Denyer for Bristol Central, but it is time to get Carlos and company at the next election and make sure we have a group of Green Bristol MPs. Well, at the moment, we're looking at all of them because that just makes sense if you come second place somewhere. Bristol East obviously was particularly close, so that's somewhere very, very obvious to be looking at. But actually, frankly, I want to see a Green MP in any seat in this country. What it comes down to is a question of resourcing, members, volunteers, and who can you get off on the ground. What I would say is it's early days before a general election, but doubling membership, the resources that come from that, the membership money, the kind of events we're doing tonight, it's all looking very promising. So this will be our biggest and most ambitious election ever in Bristol. What number of MPs that looks like yet, I can't put a number on it yet because it's too early, but I would say we're prepared to be more ambitious than we've ever been before. So I'm concerned, but I am aware. And what am I aware of? The political context. So we had 14 years of Conservative austerity that absolutely slashed budgets for everything, but particularly for councils. We have councils in this country where 80% of the budget is being spent on adult social care, and so there's hardly any money for anything else. We got rid of the Conservatives, and then we got the Labour government, and they are doing the exact same thing, if not even worse. And so I think there is a real thing here when you run a council that you need to tell the story about the fact that the difficult decisions you're making are not the difficult decisions you want to make, they're the decisions of this national Labour government. Now, the Labour government can make different decisions because a national budget is nothing like a household economy. So when they talk about tricky choices, it's always tricky choices for working class communities, for migrants, for disabled people. It's never tricky choices for multimillionaires and billionaires. Now, a council budget is very different to a national budget because that is much more like a household economy. You can only do with what you're given with by national government. And so that's a complex story to tell. But I'm absolutely confident that the Green-led council will keep telling that story, which is ultimately being fiscally responsible, running the council in a balanced way that makes those decisions, but also never taking the eye off the ball, that this Labour government should never get away with the fact that they have squeezed councils so badly that these councillors have had to make those decisions. Now, the difference between a Green council and any other council is a Labour council, Conservative council, a Lib Dem council, have all been responsible for these austerity budgets. So their councils can't turn to the government and say, we deserve better. A Green council can absolutely say that a Green government would not have put councils in this position in the first place. We would have made decisions that would have meant multimillionaires and billionaires had to give up some of their wealth so our public services could be run properly. That's the key difference we've got to make and will continue to make. There's two parts to that answer, and I think you're right when you say everything's polarizing these days, because it can feel like that. So I think you have a much bigger macro question before I get onto specifically answering, which is how do you as politicians make sure that people are consulted and it's genuine consultation rather than notification, and also do it in a way where you're not a blank sheet of paper and just saying to people, there isn't a climate crisis, or we don't need to clean up the air, because those things clearly need to happen. But also, how do we recognize that this needs to be done in a way where everyone feels included in the conversation? And even if the conversation doesn't go the way that you want it to go, you still feel like you've been listened to, you've been heard, and this was the final decision that was made. And I think that's a challenge to all politicians, to always get better at doing that. On the more specific question about the low traffic neighbourhoods in themselves, we do need to reduce traffic on our roads, and it's as simple as that. Now, what I find over and over again around the country with low traffic neighbourhoods is the majority of people do agree with the fact that we need to reduce traffic, there's too much congestion on the street, and the fact that toxic air means that people are dying prematurely from lung conditions, diabetes, mental health conditions that are being exacerbated by the toxic air. And so that's clearly not acceptable. It's also really clear that far too often the toxic air is happening in places that are working class communities, and particularly disproportionately with people of colour. So there's a social justice element to this too. So the question is, how do you make sure that you do it fairly and that you're not just pushing traffic out into the working class areas and making sure that wealthy areas are clean? And I think the way you do that is by taking a kind of pan-Bristol approach and making sure that you're looking at all the roads and everyone's included. But what I find over and over again is the majority of people are happy with how this is going. They're just not shouting because they're unhappy. There are a small group of people where it runs very deeply, where this is the number one thing that they're concerned about. And I don't question for a second that they don't feel deeply about this. I hear them and I can hear the passion about it. I also feel equally deeply about it. I feel really, really clearly that we've got to make sure that we reduce traffic. We have a climate crisis and an air pollution crisis, and we've got to deal with that. So the question becomes, how do you make sure you're telling that story that really includes people in the conversation, that can lead to difficult conversations, but ultimately there's a feedback loop of people being listened to and being spoken to in a way that's treating them like adults, where they're not just being pandered to, but also they don't feel like they're being lectured to. I'm absolutely confident that our Green councillors have the capacity and are able to do that and are doing that. I think it's about just making sure that we keep the conversation going, that you're not just doing it once and expecting it to be done, but it's a constant feedback loop of making sure that people feel like they're in that conversation. The cost of living crisis, I mean, this is happening right across England and Wales, but Bristol's a particular example of where you have mass inequality. You have some areas of mass wealth in Bristol that are right alongside a council estate or where people are homeless, sleeping on the streets. None of that has to be that way. None of it is natural order. That's a result of political choices. And we can make different political choices. So a mass council building programme, for instance, to make sure there's more council homes. We know that rental prices in Bristol are absolutely astronomical and getting worse every single day. And again, none of that needs to happen. That often happens because there isn't enough houses. So by not having enough council homes, that's putting more pressure on an already overinflated rental market. So I think the cost of living crisis, making sure we're reducing people's bills and also really getting on top of rents by both building council homes and also introducing rent controls are things that will work right across the country, but I think have particular resonance in Bristol. And people pit tackling the climate crisis against the cost of living crisis, but this is a really, really good example of where you can both tackle the climate crisis, make sure people have a better standard of council homes, and also make sure you're creating jobs. In the long run, though, we do need to make sure that there's more homes. There's 1 million households on the waiting list nationally. That's totally unacceptable, and we need to make sure we're providing that council home. Personal and a political answer. My personal answer is my partner lived in Bristol for 18 years and he was very involved with refugees and migrant festivals and also support there. And I know that Bristol is a city, more than almost any other city, that is both built on migration, both in problematic ways around empire and colonialism, and we saw that with the falling of the statue, of the Colson statue, and the whole discourse that happened, not just in Bristol, not just nationally, but actually that rung around the world. This really urgent conversation about what does it look like to embrace multiculturalism and to look at what happens when you bring cultures together and the tensions that can exist within that between different cultures, but also the beautifulness that happens around art and culture and actually what does it look like when we learn to live together and create a city together in that way. I also think patriotism is a really important part of being British, and during a football game I will paint a St George's flag across my face and I'll be proud of being English at that time. We also know that when people wave flags as an attempt to intimidate people, I don't think there's anything less British than that. I think that's one of the most unpatriotic things you can do, and the irony of using an English flag or a British symbol at that moment to do that is completely unacceptable. And so this is the thing, symbols mean different things to different people, that flag means different things to different people. But ultimately I think it comes down to compassion, it comes down to empathy, and it comes down to community. What is the meaning of your communication? And when you're waving that flag, what is the message you're sending out to do that? And if the message you're sending out is that you care about your community, there's lots of other ways to do that. That involves like protecting the local library, protecting the local green space, litter picking, getting involved with the Green Party. All of these are deeply patriotic things. I don't think it's particularly patriotic. In fact, I would say it's very unpatriotic to make anyone feel intimidated or marginalised in their own home city. So the red poppy famously symbolises the people who fell during war and kind of, commemorates the victims. The white poppy is calling for peace. It's looking at what does it look like to put peace and diplomacy in the future so we can make sure there's no future wars.